Okay, so we are starting at the 13 colonies, and the 13 colonies comes right, like, directly from where we were just learning in the early settlements. I'm excited to read about the 13 colonies. I personally enjoy reading about the early settlements, and I just think it's interesting what happened in the beginning of the United States. So I'm excited about early colonies, or the 13 colonies, but today we're just doing the mini introduction. So on the board, you can just see a picture of the 13 colonies. Like, that is just a tiny little map of it. So the original 13 colonies are Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina. Those are the states that were part of the original 13 colonies. So the red ones are New England colonies, the middle colonies are orange, and the southern colonies are green. So we don't know too much about the original 13 colonies, except for they were at the beginning. So together we're going to do the true false, which is always my favorite. I just like to get these in my mind. Like, are these going to be true or are these going to be false? So you should already have your extra little diagram drawn. So number 1 says, the first towers and cities in the colonies were near the coast. Is that true or false? If you happen to just look at our picture, you should be able to answer that. The first towns and cities were near the coast. The coast means close to an ocean. If you looked at our pictures, we should know that without even having to read. 2. By the way, if you're watching this at home, you'll have your paper when you come back. 2. People in the colonies were given fewer democratic freedoms than they had in Europe. Were they given fewer freedoms? Were they given more? Were they given less? What do you think? Number 3. Anne Hutchinson was the first governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Do you think that's true or do you think that's false? The Duke of York gave New Jersey to Peter something. Peter S. is what we're going to call him, because that's a long last name that Mrs. Kneifel isn't sure what it is. Sure. Do we think that's true or false? And remember, it's just, hey, what do you think? Right off the top of your head, and we'll find out later what it actually was. William Penn wrote The Frame of Government to describe how Pennsylvania would be governed. Rush, can you please put your lid on that before it spills? Thank you. 6. The New England colonies were known as the bread basket colonies. What a fun nickname. Mrs. Kneifel absolutely loves when restaurants give you a basket full of bread. It's the best. I'm obsessed with bread. Number 7. Religious groups were not the only ones looking for a new start in America. If you paid attention on our past page, you should be able to answer this one as well without even having to read. What? I agree. Whatever, Phoebe. The first permanent settlement in America was Jamestown, Virginia. The first permanent settlement, Jamestown, Virginia. North Carolina was the largest English colony in North America. And finally, number 10, only a small group of Southerners ran large plantations, but small farmers might hold a few enslaved people. What do we think? What do we think? All right. Dun, da, da, da. I need to actually share my screen here with people that I'm join call. Pause. Sorry, I have to share my screen. I don't know why I didn't do that to begin with. That would have made more sense, but it's okay. So, wait, I still need to share the screen. So our essential question, or what we're really going to be focusing on over the next week and a half, week or two, how did English settlers in North America grow strong and independent into colonies? So remember, when they started, there wasn't that many people, and things were rough, and things were hard, and then they got bigger and more people. Then they were eventually able to branch off into these colonies, like kind of like states, but instead colonies. So we're going to be trying to find out, or thinking, or learning about how did that happen. It did not happen overnight. It did not happen over a week. It was a long period of time, and lots of things had to happen for people to be able to be in these colonies and for the colonies to be successful. So we're working on that. We do, however, have a brain pop to watch on building the 13 colonies. So this is going to give us a little bit of background knowledge before we actually start reading the stuff. We shot the lights. Rush, I'm not there yet. And once again, you are far away from the lights, so it's not going to be you even when I say for the lights to be shut off. That's a waste of energy. All right. Maddie, you're close. Please shut off the lights. It's literally right here. I'm trying to move it closer.
Well,
people are
now
just
you've got it. It says right here, no skipping through town on Sunday whilst eating an ear of corn. These reenactors take their blue laws seriously. Dear Tim and Moby, why did England make 13 American colonies? Wouldn't it have been simpler just to make one big one? From Marlena. Huh, good question. Maybe England would have done that if they'd thought of it from the beginning. But the 13 colonies weren't set up based on some well-organized master plan. The only real plan England had was to get rich and powerful. A popular British play at the time described Virginia as a paradise coated in gold. Streets were filled with it, toilets were made of it, prisoners were even bound with golden rope. Of course, the play's authors had never been to Virginia, but Europe was obsessed with stories about riches in the so-called New World. It started with Christopher Columbus bringing back news of the Americas in 1493. Then the race was on to snatch up all that land. All of Europe's powers wanted in. Spain had a head start since Columbus was working for them. In the 1500s, they grew fabulously wealthy on gold and other resources from South America and Mesoamerica. Portugal was close behind, making a fortune growing sugarcane in Brazil. Setting up colonies to get rich was part of a system called mercantilism. Governments tried to accumulate as much wealth as possible through trade. For Spain, that meant importing lots of gold and silver mined in the colonies. For other countries, it meant shipping raw materials from the colonies to the motherland, turning them into finished goods, and then exporting those goods for sale to the colonies and other nations. By the early 1600s, England was ready to get in on all this colonizing action. South and Central America had already been claimed by then. So, King James I fixed his eye on America's east coast. Well, no, people already lived there, and had for thousands of years. The native peoples of North America had their own civilizations and cultures. But that didn't stop England from laying claim to the land. In 1606, the king issued a charter to set up a colony in Virginia. It granted a private company the right to settle the land. The company then rented it out to English citizens to go live there. In return for the charter, the colony would send home a portion of its valuable resources, like gold. But as it turned out, there was no gold in Virginia. Lucky for them, the new colony soon hit on another big moneymaker: tobacco. Yeah, King James thought smoking was a nasty habit too. But he didn't seem to mind all the money it made him. In the coming decades, a bunch more charters were issued for new colonies. Southern colonies like Virginia were based around farming. Besides tobacco, they planted rice, indigo, and cotton, cash crops grown for profit. And since they didn't pay the workforce, those profits were huge. The whole system was built on slavery. People from West Africa were kidnapped, sold into slavery, and shipped to the colonies. Their journey to America was one leg in the triangular trade. In the next leg, crops and other raw materials from the colonies were shipped back to England. There, they were manufactured into goods and shipped to Africa to be traded for more slaves. But it wasn't only the southern colonies involved in the slave trade. Colonies to the north began exporting rum to Africa, trading it for enslaved people. They were brought to the Caribbean islands and forced to work on sugar plantations. Then the sugar was sent back to the colonies to be made into more rum. Cutting England out of the deal like that was sort of against the rules of mercantilism. But the crown was making too much money on other colonial businesses to care. The middle colonies sent grain and corn, plus livestock and iron ore, while New made into more rum. Cutting England out of the deal like that was sort of against the rules of mercantilism. But the crown was making too much money on other colonial businesses to care. The middle colonies sent grain and corn, plus livestock and iron ore, while New England colonies sent fish, lumber, and whale oil for lighting lamps. They also built the ship and whale oil for lighting lamps. They also built the ships to transport all of these goods. With England getting so rich on these imports, it didn't mind that the colonies were making a little money on the side. Plus, the English were kind of busy fighting wars, with France, with Spain, and even with themselves. So the colonies got used to doing their own thing and governing themselves. Each one elected a legislature, modeled on England's parliament. They debated current issues and passed laws about daily life. But their independence didn't last. Eventually, life calmed down in England, and King Charles II took over. He figured he could squeeze a lot more cash out of the colonies. So he passed the Navigation Acts, a series of laws forcing the colonies to trade only with England, which Massachusetts basically ignored. In response, Charles canceled their charter, taking away their right to self-govern. The next king, James II, cracked down even more. He took away the charters of all northern and most middle colonies and closed their legislatures. They were streamlined into a single colony, the Dominion of New England. Having just one colony was much easier for the crown to control. Royal troops were brought in to enforce British law. And all churches were forced to hold Church of England services. This was a major problem in northern colonies like Massachusetts. The Puritans who founded these places left England because they didn't like its church. Now the church was invading the society they'd set up. The colonists were furious and ready to revolt. Actually, this was almost a century before the Revolutionary War, but it did give the colonies a taste of standing up to the motherland. The old colonial governments were restored, and the crown backed down. After this, England went back to the policy of salutary neglect. It left the colonies alone, assuming they'd thrive without much supervision. And that's just what they did. Their economies boomed and populations soared. They were still loyal to England, but they got to run things pretty much on their own. England benefited too, saving the money they'd spent to keep the colonies in line. This situation worked pretty well for both sides, for about 75 years. Around then, France and England began fighting over lands out west, at which point England became very hands-on. It sent in an army to defend the colony's land rights in the French and Indian War. England would win that war, but only after spending an enormous amount of money. To pay for the victory, it seemed only fair to tax the colonies, and tax them hard. And so began the build-up to the American Revolution. Well, there you go. You're a free robot. I hope you've learned a valuable lesson about...
Maddie, you turn on the lights. Love these two. All right, so we are about out of time to go through our Quizlet, which is fine because we didn't go through it on Friday. Tomorrow we will not be having social studies necessarily because of the spelling bee. The only social studies we might be doing tomorrow is maybe some states and capitals. But for the most part, we will not have social studies tomorrow. So that was just giving us a little nice intro about our lovely 13 colonies. Right now, if you are in pickup, I need you to pack up. Everyone else, I need you to start listening to my directions. Oh, there's my phone. Goodbye, friends. I really think so.